Okay, well, lovely to see you all back. Yeah, okay, we had a great chat last time about Bodhichitta, the mind of enlightenment. So hopefully you've had a bit of time to digest what we talked about over the week. And if any thoughts come up or have come up over the last week, do feel free to ask at any stage. But we'll start off, before we get going with the discussion, we'll start off with a motivation. So setting our motivation so that all of our study, all of our discussion that we do today, all goes towards alleviating the suffering of all sentient beings. So all the humans of this world that we can see, all the animals that we can see, and all those beings that we can't actually see ourselves, we don't have the ability to see. So all of those beings who are suffering in many, many ways. So of course there's the manifest sufferings of body and mind. Many, many humans going through hardship these days with, famine, war, disease, all sorts of things like this. So all of those ones are quite easy for us to bring to mind. There's also all the mental suffering that people go through, mental illness, but also just everyday problems that we have in our mind, where our mind gets disturbed, unhappy, grief, all of these things. So really motivating so that all of our positive actions go towards alleviating all of those different types of suffering. But then not just leaving it at that, also thinking about the many, many beings who don't experience manifest suffering at the moment. So maybe they're actually leading quite happy lives. They've got quite good things going on for themselves. But the thing is that when we have those happy or these like good conditions, it's very easy then for our afflictions to take over, and we get more greedy, and we do whatever we can to protect that pleasure, that happiness that we have. And so on that basis, then people tend to, harm others to protect their own happiness. And then they create suffering for others, and they create the causes for their own future suffering as well. So in the future, at some point, they have to experience the results of those negative actions that they've done in order to protect their own happiness. And even if they don't engage in those kind of negative actions to protect their happiness, none of us have control over when these pleasurable experiences will finish. We don't know when they will come. We can try and gather all the conditions together so that we have the best chance of having happiness, but there's no certainty that we'll actually experience happiness on that basis. So that is also this type of suffering of really lacking control. So not having control over our experiences of happiness or suffering. And so all of us who are these kinds of beings who are bound by our afflictions, then we have to experience all these different types of suffering, sometimes manifest suffering, sometimes these sufferings where we have happiness, but it changes, suffering reasserts itself. And really the suffering, which is the worst one, of lacking control over our experiences. So thinking, really setting a strong motivation that what we do today acts as a cause for us to be able to help all sentient beings overcome all these different types of suffering within their own continuum. So with that in mind, then, we will recite the four immeasurables and also the refuge and bodhicitta verse. Okay, so yeah, let's start off with the refuge and bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Did we recite that 3 times? We did, yes, okay. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that knows no suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment and hatred for those held close and distant. Okay, so last week we really talked about just sort of introducing what bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, is. And also, we discussed a bit about renunciation and, the placement of bodhicitta in terms of the context of our practice, as it being the main motivating factor for the great vehicle, the Mahayana. So were there any questions that, just to start off with, any questions that came up in your mind over the last week or after we discussed these things last time? It's okay if there weren't any questions. And you can ask me at any time anyway, so no problem. Okay, so this week we're going to start to talk a little bit about the methods by which we work to generate bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment. So as I mentioned briefly towards the end of the last session, it's really good to bear in mind why we would actually want to do this practice. If you don't understand the benefits of practicing bodhicitta, of developing it within your own mind, really it's about your own mind becoming this mind of enlightenment, then you're going to have a fairly sort of, let's say, weak, desire to actually do it. So it's really important to understand what those benefits are and understanding it in comparison, especially to how we've gone about life so far, which is more with a self-focused attitude. We would say a self-cherishing attitude, one where we put ourselves as most important. Or maybe it's not just ourselves, but also those that we include within our little bubble, our friends and our family. So holding ourselves, our friends and our family, those that we're attached to, and our happiness as being the most important, and others' happiness as being less important. So when you have that kind of tight, self-focused mind, it actually creates problems for you in the immediate sense and also in the long term. So when you've got that really self-focused, self-cherishing attitude, then anything that comes along that might act as a bit of a threat towards your happiness or the happiness of those that you're attached to, then immediately you want to do something to push away that threat. And on that basis, then we tend to get angry, we tend to get jealous, we tend to have all these different negative emotions, and unhappiness easily arises in our mind. So then your mind becomes in that moment, it becomes unhappy, becomes very tight. And we find it very easy to then engage in the negative actions like harming others. It might only be small harms, it might be big harms. Whether it's through our body, whether it's through our speech, or even if it's just on a mental level, we can end up engaging in these negative actions that lead to harm, cause actual harm or lead to harm to others. And we could say also creates the causes within our continuum for experiencing suffering in the future for ourselves on the basis of accumulating that negative action, that negative karma. So there's it's said in the Guru Puja practice, some of you might be familiar with it, is that self-cherishing is the doorway to all torment. Right? So it's the foundation for all problems in the world. When you think of, all the wars that are fought, all the, internal conflict within families, within countries, within regions within the countries, within different groups within society, it all comes back down to self-cherishing as being the root cause of all of those problems. So we can't change everybody else's attitude. It's impossible for, if you wanted to go and protest out in the streets and go, I'm protesting against self-cherishing, it's probably not going to get you very far, right? Especially if you hold on to self-cherishing within your own mind, right? Thinking my view is right, everybody else's view is wrong, right? Everybody's got to follow me, listen to what I say, because what I say is the most important. And you go out there and you try and force other people to get rid of their self-cherishing. It's not going to work. So what we have to do is we have to start with our own minds. We really have to cultivate, do the experiment on our own minds and really see what happens when I start to reduce my own self-cherishing, when I start to develop this outward-looking attitude that thinks of, at the start, we will still be thinking, of course, of our own happiness as being quite important, but also then developing that attitude which thinks of others' happiness as being equally as important as ours. What happens to my mind when I start to really value and cherish others around me, both those that I like and also those that I currently have a bit of difficulty with? So really seeing what happens in the mind. And then, working as much as we can to increase that cherishing of others more and more and more, and see the change that happens to ourselves. And on that basis, we have a chance to actually assist others in their own adoption of that attitude of cherishing others. But it has to start with ourselves. You can't sort of be somebody who holds on tightly to anger, but tells somebody else they're such an angry person. You've got to stop that anger, right? It doesn't work, does it? You have to work in your own mind to reduce your own anger, work out what those methods are. You can see what works, what doesn't work, and then you can assist others to do the same. I think there's a story of Gandhi, I think it was, who there was a family who came to ask him for some advice because their child was just eating an awful lot of sweets and they could not get this child to stop eating sweets. And so they, came to Gandhi and said, well, what should we do? And Gandhi said, yeah, you have to go away. Come back in like a week or two, I think he said. And so they thought, well, that's a bit odd, but they went away and they came back. And when they came back, they said to him, so why did we have to wait for this advice? He said, well, I myself was eating a lot of sweets. And so I felt that first I needed to give up sweets myself, and then I could give you the advice for your child. It's a very nice example, I thought. So this is what we're trying to do then. It's like, yes, we can see there are all these problems in society that come down at the very root, the very basis to self-cherishing. But the first thing that therefore what we need to do is turn our own attention inwards and see how we can go about changing our own attitude and then work to spread that outwards towards others in whatever way we can. Sometimes it can be even, just through our own change in our behavior on the basis of what's going on in our mind, that it can affect others around us just naturally. So I've got a friend who's a nun, and her family, they were all kind of, well, maybe they still are to some extent, but they were avid hunters. So they're right into it. And to the point where they actually, I think, they weren't so happy perhaps that she was a nun. So they'd kind of rub it in her face a bit and, tell her they were going off hunting and that kind of thing. But over time, over the years, they started to really appreciate the changes that had happened for her. And so their attitude also changed. And they definitely did less hunting. They certainly wouldn't rub it in her face anymore. And they even became quite interested in listening to some of the teachers that were her teachers as well. So their minds started to change just on the basis, she didn't go around telling them what to do or what not to do, but just on the basis of the change in her own behavior and her own attitude, then it affected those around her as well. So it's a really, really nice example, I thought. So changing this attitude from focusing inward to focusing outwards. We look at the great bodhisattvas that are already practicing the path or have practiced the path, and maybe they've already achieved the result of a Buddha. They're able to go further than holding their own happiness and others' happiness as equally important, and they can completely cherish others, with really no thought for themselves. So this is what we're working towards, but it's like we've got to go slowly. The benefit from having that kind of attitude is that your motivation and your outlook becomes so incredibly vast. So instead of you being happy when just you yourself or your immediate friends and family gain what they want, instead you would be happy, on the basis of limitless sentient beings achieving happiness. So the potential for having a really positive frame of mind is like really vast with this mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta. And it's not the case that we have to change all of the physical activities or our daily life activities that we do. What we're basically doing is trying to bring a bodhicitta motivation to our lives so that as much as possible, our positive activities that we engage in, whether it's through body, whether it's through speech, whether it's through mind, actually act as a cause for the attainment of this state of enlightenment where we have the greatest capacity to benefit others. So just through changing our attitude, just through developing this really vast positive motivation, we can gain great benefit in the immediate sense because our mind becomes more relaxed, more positive, more happy. And also in the long-term sense, because all of those positive karmas that we're accumulating are not just being accumulated for the sake of this life or even for the sake of future lives, but all the way up to enlightenment. So it said that a positive action that is motivated by the mind of enlightenment, you continue to experience the results of that positive action all the way up to enlightenment. It's not exhausted. It doesn't run out until you attain enlightenment. The caveat to that is as long as it's not destroyed by anger. So you have to also work to protect those virtues that you accumulate, that you've, motivated for enlightenment. But yeah. Does it make sense? Are these things that you've heard before? Yeah. Okay. So these are things that we need to reflect on again and again and again to continue to make sure that we're really strongly motivated towards developing this really amazing mind of enlightenment. So in terms of the techniques about how we go about actually developing them, have you heard of the two main techniques before for developing this mind or for making our mind as it is now into the mind of enlightenment? No? Okay. Barbara?
I would say exchanging self for others.
Yes. That's one. Yeah, excellent.
And then I would say it's either 6 or 8. It's a 6 or 8 practice of,
Close. If you go down the middle of that and go 7.
I don't know.
No, okay. So it's called the sevenfold instruction on cause and effect. Does that ring a bell?
Maybe once you start talking about it, it will,
Mm.
but it doesn't. I know there's a 6 something, seeing everyone as your mother,
Mm.
the, the mother is kind. I think that's the 6. And then the 8 is 8 different things that all beings are teachers in some way. See
Mm.
yourself as the lowest. Um,
Ah, yes.
every so those are the 6 and 8, and
Mm.
I thought maybe that was one of them, but clearly not.
No, you're totally on the right track. So the 8 is probably the 8 verses for training the mind, I suspect. Yeah. So we won't go into that method in this course. We'll stick with the main two. So one of which is equalizing and exchanging self and others. The other one, which is kind of like there is 6 involved, but actually it's a sevenfold process. In some respects, you could say there are 8 steps to the sevenfold process. It's just a little bit confusing, but the way that the title of it is the sevenfold instruction on cause and effect. So these two lineages for developing the mind of enlightenment come from two great masters. So for the equalizing, exchanging self and others, that comes from the master Shantideva, who is this, really phenomenal master of Nalanda, who wrote that great text, The Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, which is such a beautiful text. So yeah, that's where equalizing, exchanging self and others comes from. The sevenfold instruction on cause and effect, that comes from Atisha. So Atisha is this master who went from Nalanda to Tibet. He was invited to Tibet to sort of re-energize the Dharma in Tibet. I think did I tell the story of Atisha in the patience course? I did. Oh, you don't remember? Shella, do you remember if I talked about Atisha?
I want to say we did. Did we talk about Atisha or was it a Sangha? I don't remember which one. So it must have been Atisha.
Probably was Atisha.
It was one of the A ones.
I think it was Atisha.
Atisha, yeah, probably was Atisha. Yeah, yeah, maybe I talked about Atisha because there is the story of Atisha in terms of he took his tea boy from India to practice patience with. That might have been the story. Does that ring a bell? So Atisha is, anyway, if I didn't tell the full story, I'll tell a little bit more of the story now. So Atisha was actually the abbot at Nalanda University in India. And at the time, I think it was Yeshe or Jiangshi. I can never remember which is the uncle and which is the nephew. So one of the two, I think it might have been Yeshe was the uncle. So I think it was Yeshe who was the uncle who was the Dharma king and one of the Dharma kings in Tibet at the time. And so he realized that really the Dharma needed to be revitalized in Tibet, so that everybody knew what was the correct way to practice, because he was concerned that some practices had been a little bit polluted. So he decided that it probably would be best to invite somebody from Nalanda University to Tibet, so they could make sure that the Dharma was revitalized in a pure form. So he sent a number, I think it was more than 20 students to India to work out who was the best person to invite. And so they went and many of them died. And I think only 2 made it back to Tibet. And when they came back, they said, well, we have done a lot of investigation and we think the best person to invite would be Atisha. So, in those days, and also, really at any time, not just in those days, there's the custom of making, really a grand offering for the sake of receiving Dharma teachings, which is not for the point of the teacher requires a grand offering, but rather it's out of respect and out of appreciation for the pricelessness of the Dharma teachings, because the Dharma teachings are what help us to transform our mind, So, and that's something that really you can't put a price on. So Yeshe went in search of gold. So he went to collect gold to make this offering to Atisha. And as he was in the process of collecting the gold, then he was captured by one of the Mongolian warrior kings, one of the Khans, I think it was, and he was imprisoned. And so his nephew came to petition for his release, and the Khan king said, well, actually, yes, I will give you back your uncle, but you have to give me his weight, his body weight in gold. So then his nephew went in search of collecting more gold so that he would be able to, pay the ransom. But he was only able to collect enough that would cover the weight of up to and not including the head of Yeshe. And he went to the prison where Yeshe was being held, and he was just really distraught. And he said, I've tried, but I've not been able to collect enough for your entire body weight. And his uncle said, look, don't worry about me. I'm old, I'm going to die anyway. It is so much more important that the Dharma be revitalized in a pure form. So take all that gold that you have raised and take it to India and to invite Atisha back to Tibet. So Zhangzhebe did that, and he went with, he didn't go all the way to India himself, but he went a fair way to India with the group of people who were going to invite Atisha. And then the group went on and invited, made petitions to Atisha and told him the whole story. And he was just really quite amazed that Yeshua had been, made this great sacrifice for the sake of Dharma in Tibet. So he decided to come to Tibet. And he went and he taught what is now like really the foundation of all our Lam Rim texts that we have today, which is the Lamb for the Path to Enlightenment. And when that text went back to Nalanda University, and all the Indian masters there were amazed, and they said, this is like really incredible, because there is, he never wrote a text like this in India. And it's really, so it's through the kindness of Atisha that we've had, we have these very easy to follow instructions on all the stages of the path to enlightenment. It's like a ladder that takes you all the way through. So before then, you kind of had to figure the way out yourself in a sense, but then Atisha put it together in this step-by-step guide. We were so fortunate. So it's from Atisha then that we have this sevenfold instruction on cause and effect, which is one of the methods for developing the mind of enlightenment. So that's the one that we're going to focus on first, and then we will, in a few weeks, we'll look at the equalizing and exchanging self for other method. So these two methods, sometimes they're called the two methods for those of dull faculties and those of sharp faculties, but I don't know that it necessarily holds, because I think both of them require you to really have an approach that uses your intellect, uses your reasoning, your powers of reasoning, and also requires, quite a bit of merit to really be able to put them into practice fully. So the method on the sevenfold instruction on cause and effect is the method that we do need to reflect on the existence of past and future lives. So that can be a little bit of a challenge for those of us who were brought up with a background of perhaps not thinking about, do past and future lives exist or not? So we really have to investigate that and investigate it honestly. Like, I don't feel like, well, definitely, it's not just my feeling, but Buddhist philosophy is not a type of philosophy where you just have to accept things because you're told that that's how they are. It's all based on logic and reasoning. Even Shakyamuni Buddha himself said, don't accept what I say just out of faith in me. You need to really look into what I'm saying and analyze it for yourself and check to see if it's right. He said, you should really analyze what I say like a goldsmith checks gold. So a goldsmith, usually when they check gold is first, they'll check for impurities by first rubbing the gold to see if that shows any impurities. And then they'll cup the gold to see if they can see impurities that way. And then they'll go for an even more intense analysis by burning the gold, melting it, and seeing if there are impurities that way. So Shakyamuni Buddha himself said you should really check using this threefold process of analysis. We won't go into it today, but it's basically using your powers of logic and reasoning to make sure that what he has taught is actually accurate. And only on that basis, then you accept it to be the case. So that's also the approach that we need to take with, with respect to things like past and future lives. So looking into it, checking to see, is this a valid argument? Is there a valid argument to support it? Are there any arguments that show that it is not true, it is not the case? And then sometimes it might be the case that we can't come to 100% conclusion about a point. And then we have to look to see, well, what is probably the most likely at this point with the capacity I have currently? What is the most likely correct answer? What is the most beneficial way of looking at it? So I always think that's really important way to approach the Dharma. Definitely no need to accept it just because it's stated. You need to check for yourself, really look into it. So with this sevenfold cause and effect instruction, then we'll be looking a little bit about past and future lives. Whereas with the equalizing and exchanging self and others method, you don't actually need to, especially at the start, look into whether past and future lives exist. So sometimes that can be a bit of an easier method if you struggle with past and future lives. But in the end, you're really going to need to look into both of these methods to get that full experience of developing the mind of enlightenment. But you can start with whatever works best for your mind, at where you are at the moment. Okay, so if you remember last week, we were talking about the mind of enlightenment and what it is. So can you tell me, based on how's your memory, what exactly the mind of enlightenment is? It's a mind, sure. What are the sort of features that accompany the mind of enlightenment?
I don't know for sure. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Barbara.
No, I was just going to say it's free from all delusions.
The mind of enlightenment itself is, we could say, is definitely an accurate mind. But we wouldn't classify it as a wisdom per se, like where, it's not just because you've developed the mind of enlightenment doesn't mean you've eliminated all ignorance, for instance. Doesn't even mean you've eliminated all the other afflictions. You could have the mind of enlightenment, but still in your continuum have things like attachment and jealousy and these kinds of things. I mean, they'd be subdued for sure if you've really developed the mind of enlightenment in its full form, but you have not yet necessarily abandoned all of those afflictions.
So we are not equating enlightenment with Buddhahood.
Okay. So this is, good point. Okay. So the mind of enlightenment is not actually enlightenment itself. Mind of enlightenment, or bodhicitta. So that's just the English translation of bodhicitta. So bodhicitta, bodhi meaning enlightenment, chitta meaning mind. Or in Tibetan, we say jamchuki sem. So sem meaning mind, jamchuk meaning enlightenment. So it's the mind of enlightenment. It's not referring to an enlightened mind, but rather it's really referring to a mind that is directed towards enlightenment. So last week we talked about how renunciation, which is the term that we usually use in English for this term Ngijung in Tibetan, which otherwise is translated as the intention to definitely emerge. So renunciation, which is the main motivating factor for somebody who is striving on the Hinayana path, trying to attain their liberation, the mere liberation, or nirvana. So renunciation is that mind that strives for liberation, having seen the shortcomings of samsara. So the mind of enlightenment, likewise, or bodhicitta, is a mind that is directed towards the goal of enlightenment. So if you have the mind of enlightenment or bodhicitta, you don't necessarily yet have an enlightened mind. It's the motivating factor that causes you, that will propels you along the path to achieving the goal. So renunciation is the motivating factor that propels you along the path to attain liberation. Bodhicitta, or the mind of enlightenment, is the motivating factor that propels you to do all the work required along the path to attain the result of enlightenment. So since it's that motivating factor, so that motivating factor starts right at the start of the path. We generate it now in our continuum to the best of our ability, but at that point it's, we're still kind of working at it. We haven't yet got the fully qualified bodhicitta, or mind of enlightenment. That happens right at the start of the path when someone becomes a bodhisattva. So once someone becomes a bodhisattva at the start of the Mahayana path, then it's that mind of enlightenment that will keep them going on the path, doing all that they need to do, abandoning all the afflictions, the seeds of the afflictions, the imprints of the afflictions, that will take them all the way up to the result of enlightenment, where you're right, then all afflictions, all delusions, even the stains of the delusions have been completely eliminated when you reach that goal. So that's an important point that you bring up, Barbara. Yeah.
So just to clarify, an enlightened mind is not the same as enlightenment?
An enlightened mind is, we can say, is that exists in the continuum of someone who has attained enlightenment, but the mind of enlightenment is not the same as an enlightened mind.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So the mind of enlightenment, or bodhicitta, refers to the mind that is striving towards enlightenment. It's the motivation that gets you to enlightenment. An enlightened mind is one that has already attained enlightenment. So it's already done all of the work on the path and has achieved the result. Yeah, thanks for bringing up that point, because yeah, I hadn't kind of thought about that's in English, it sounds like the mind of enlightenment would be a mind that has already accomplished enlightenment, but in actual fact, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a mind that is directed towards enlightenment. Yeah. So do you remember last week then, we talked about bodhicitta, or the mind of enlightenment, that motivating factor, what its real entity is?
A good future rebirth?
So, well, it will assist us to attain a good future rebirth, yes, but it's not the main work that it's doing, or the main entity of it.
Venerable, I was writing, so I missed that question. Would you mind repeating it, please?
What is the real entity of bodhicitta, or mind of enlightenment? Okay, that's okay. I mean, it's a lot to try and retain, isn't it? It's a lot of information. So, and do tell me if I go too fast through things, but, it's like, in my mind, I quite like to have things sort of set out clearly and neatly. I like to know the system that you progress through, which are the steps, and what I'm aiming for, what that actually is, that mind that I'm trying to develop in my own mind. So I like to have some kind of like points to land down on, so that when I think in the future, oh, what is bodhicitta? What is that mind of enlightenment? Oh, I know what it is. So I'll just bring up the file again that I brought up last week. Just a second. Actually, I should share it in the chat so that you have it. Let's see, where is it? Okay.
Do you mean compassion, or no?
Compassion is like the main motivating, like the main cause of actually developing the mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta. When we look at the bodhicitta itself, or the mind of enlightenment, this is its entity. So it's a mind that wishes for complete enlightenment for the sake of others. So it's a mind, of course, because we've said it's a mind of enlightenment, and it has these two aspirations. Does that ring a bell? I mentioned last week it has these two aspirations. Okay, so the reason why this is an important thing to note is that these two aspirations have to be complete in order for your own mind to become bodhicitta, to become this mind directed towards enlightenment. And these two aspirations are actually focused on different things. It's kind of weird. So the two aspirations refer to, on the one hand, like with renunciation, which is this striving towards, or almost like, it's not an aspiration per se, but it's like a striving towards liberation. The mind of enlightenment also has to involve this striving towards the goal of enlightenment. So it has to have that aspiration that strives for enlightenment. But The question then that would arise in your mind is, why would you strive to attain enlightenment? Like, what is the point?
To be of benefit to all sentient beings without exception.
That's right. So it's only in the state of enlightenment that you have the greatest capacity to benefit others. Right? So if you just wanted to get rid of your own suffering, then you can strive for just liberation, mere liberation alone, right? That will get rid of your own suffering, take less time to get there, but you have a limited capacity. You have better capacity than we have now, but still a limited capacity to benefit others. So if we really want to develop ourselves to a state where we have the greatest capacity to benefit others around us, to bring happiness to those, not just in our immediate circle, but to all sentient beings, then there is no option but to attain that state of enlightenment where you have perfect capacity. You have perfect loving kindness or loving compassion. You have perfect wisdom and you have perfect capacity because you've eliminated all obstacles without exception. So the reason why you have that aspiration that strives for enlightenment, or the reason why you develop that aspiration that strives for enlightenment, is because you have the aspiration that actually wants to help others, to be of benefit to others. So that is the causal aspiration, the aspiration that strives for the welfare of others. So if you're thinking to attain enlightenment just for your own sake, I just want to get rid of my own suffering, so I want to attain enlightenment, it's not possible. You have to have both of these aspirations. You must necessarily be striving for the welfare of others, to accomplish the welfare of others. And on that basis, then you strive for enlightenment. So does it make sense? These two aspirations really are focused on different things. Barbara, yes, sorry, just saw your hand.
The question I have, I just want to clarify. So enlightenment, liberation, and nirvana are all synonyms.
So when we're talking about enlightenment in this context, we're talking about complete enlightenment, which is the enlightenment of a Buddha. So the enlightenment of a Buddha is not equivalent to just liberation or nirvana, which is usually referring to the result of the Hinayana path, where you have just removed your own suffering and the causes for your own suffering. With a Buddha, they've not only removed, when somebody who's attained enlightenment, they not only removed their own suffering, their own causes for their own suffering, they've also removed any impediment to being able to work effortlessly and spontaneously for the sake of others. So enlightenment is the greater goal. It's like the superior goal because you have greater capacity, you have developed greater realizations, and you've accomplished greater abandonments. Liberation, or nirvana, just mere liberation, mere nirvana, that's a state in which it's like a lesser result. So it's still a pretty amazing result, but it's just something where you have accomplished basically your own welfare. Yeah. You've removed your own suffering, you've removed your own causes for suffering. You haven't developed the capacity to work effortlessly and spontaneously for others. You haven't yet gotten there. There's more work to do. So it is the case that some people, because, the practice of the Mahayana is it's not easy, we've got to say. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in these, in the context of these Mahayana practices. So some people may choose to follow the Hinayana path and achieve mere liberation to start with. But the thing is that that's actually it's like a slower process. So you go to achieve your own welfare, you remove your own suffering to start with, and then after that, you still need to do the extra work to get to enlightenment. But it's actually, it sort of slows you down to attain your own welfare first, because it is so much harder once you have removed your own suffering and the causes for your own suffering it's much harder to develop that great compassion that finds the suffering of others unbearable. Because you can't relate it to your own experience. You no longer have suffering yourself. It's much easier to just abide in that state of bliss where you're totally blissed out because you've not got any suffering yourself, right? So it's much harder to then move on and attain enlightenment. It's a much slower process. So although it's said that the Mahayana path has got, they're not easy practices. Some of the practices that you have to do are not necessarily easy. But there is a great joy that comes together with that because of having this great motivation of the mind of enlightenment, because of having great compassion. So it's actually through having great compassion, through having great loving kindness, that the mind of a bodhisattva is very light. It's very positive. They have a lot of happiness. So it means that although the practices might be challenging at times, their mind is happy in that process. So it's not, we can say that the way that it's explained is that there's a particular saying where they say, through compassion there is, there's joy, and then through wisdom they remove suffering. So yeah, I can't remember the exact quote. I should memorize these better. Does that make sense, Barbara? Does that answer your question?
It does. It just leads me to one more question.
That's okay.
The Mahayana path, isn't it working simultaneously for both of those ends?
Yeah, so you accomplish your own welfare through accomplishing the welfare of others, essentially. So this is like, when we take it back to His Holiness's famous quote, it's like, if you're going to be selfish, be wisely selfish. So what he's meaning is that actually accomplish, if you're going to be selfish and want happiness for yourself, the best way to do that is through accomplishing the happiness of others. So essentially, by working to attain enlightenment, which you can only achieve through having that causal aspiration, the aspiration that strives for others' happiness to be of benefit to others, what happens is, as a byproduct, you eliminate your own suffering and the causes for your own suffering. But that is not your motivation. Your motivation is to benefit others. So that is a way of being wisely selfish. Yeah, you know that you're going to accomplish your own aims through that process, but that is not the reason why you do it. Yeah. Okay. So for this bodhicitta, or mind of enlightenment, we need these two aspirations necessarily. So the two processes that I mentioned before, the equalizing and exchanging self and others, and the sevenfold instruction on cause and effect. So both of these are methods by which you develop these two aspirations. So through the sevenfold cause and effect instruction, we'll have a look at how that we first develop that causal aspiration, that is the aspiration that wants to benefit others, wants others to have the greatest benefit possible. And on that basis, you then develop that striving, that wish to attain enlightenment. And then also with equalizing and exchanging self for others, there will be a slightly different process, but also those two aspirations will be accomplished. Okay, so let's have a bit of a look at this first method. So the sevenfold cause and effect instruction. So the reason why it's called the sevenfold cause and effect instruction is because there is this process of cause and effect, basically. So the effect, what you're looking for, what you're wanting to attain, is bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, which is your own mind becoming that mind. The 6 causes that precede it are the causes for developing that mind in your mind. So these are probably the 6 you were thinking of before, Barbara. Yeah. So there's the 6 causes and then that one effect, which is the mind of enlightenment or bodhicitta. Now, when we break down these 6 and the 1 in another sense, we can say the first 6 steps are all about developing that causal aspiration, the aspiration that strives for the welfare of others, the aspiration that wants to benefit others. You know, like when we say, may I attain enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. For the sake of all sentient beings, that is the causal aspiration. When we say, may I attain enlightenment, that is the assisting aspiration, the aspiration that strives for enlightenment. So in these first 6 steps of the sevenfold instruction, we're working to develop that causal aspiration, the aspiration that strives for others' welfare. For the sake of others, may I do this. And on that basis, that naturally gives rise to the result, which is the mind that thought, may I attain enlightenment. So does that make sense? Yeah. So generally the process with cause and effect, cause and result, is that in order to get the result, you have to make sure the cause is there. If you don't have the cause, you won't get the result. So in order to develop that mind that strives for enlightenment, you need to have things like compassion, loving kindness for others. And then on that, you know, in order to develop compassion and loving kindness for others, we actually need to have a mind that sees others in a positive light. And in order to develop a mind that sees others in a positive light, we need to have a foundation of actually a mind that is unbiased. A mind that doesn't have this strong clinging towards, you know, friends and family, people that help us, and a strong aversion towards those that give us harm. So for that very foundation, we need equanimity. So if we actually look at the whole process in total, I'll bring it up. Oh, sorry, I noticed that there are 2 chats here I didn't see before. Oh, thanks, Karen. We discussed it in my room. Okay. Okay. So, all right, let me see if I can find, where did I put the file? Sorry, bear with me 1 minute. Okay. So I put together this chart for a class I was teaching on altruism because we were having a lot of discussion about minds and mental factors. So we don't need to worry too much about that. But this, I think, still gives us a very nice kind of clear, colourful display of the stages of the sevenfold cause and effect instruction. So here we've got the result here. So the mind of enlightenment. Don't worry too much about the relative mind of enlightenment. The relative bit, that's a distinction between relative and ultimate mind of enlightenment, which is beyond the scope of this course, I think. So anyway, the relative mind of enlightenment is just the mind of enlightenment or bodhicitta that we've been discussing. So what we're striving to develop in our mind is this mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta. And it depends on these stages that are preceding it. So at the very foundation, we have equanimity. So equanimity is this attitude, as I was saying before, that doesn't have a sense of bias, of like, although you might recognize that someone helps you at this moment or harms you at this moment, but equanimity has a mind that looks beyond that immediate help and harm to see actually that there is no sense whatsoever in having attachment towards some, you know, holding some close and pushing others away. So we'll go into the discussion of, you know, why equanimity is actually a valid mind to have. But the importance of equanimity is because we want to make it so that our attitude towards all sentient beings is equal. It's not like, sort of like the waves of the ocean where they come up and they go down like this. We want to try and have it equal and calm towards all beings. Because if we don't, then as we go through this practice and we develop states like loving kindness and compassion, if we don't have an equal attitude, a balanced attitude towards all beings, regardless of whether they are in the immediate sense helping us or harming us, then we will find we can't develop compassion towards those that are harming us. We can't develop loving kindness towards those that are harming us. We'll end up leaving some sentient beings out of our compassion and our loving kindness. And if we leave out even one sentient being, it is impossible to develop the mind of enlightenment properly. So we need to make it so that we have this attitude that is encompassing. And the thing is that actually we can say as a basis, it helps us for developing the mind of enlightenment, but also it helps us in daily life. If you're not constantly buffeted by your attachment and your aversion towards others, then your mind is naturally calmer. You're more able to deal with difficult situations in life as well. So there's an immediate benefit for us as well. So equanimity is the foundation. Then what we will go into is looking at how all sentient beings have been our mothers. So this is the point at which we have to think about past and future lives and really analyze to check, is that a fair assessment of how things exist or not? So we'll discuss that in recognizing sentient beings have been our mothers. Once we have, really looked into that and come to whatever conclusion we can manage, then we think about the kindness that they have shown us when they were our mothers. And maybe it's the case that sometimes, because we're supposed to develop or base that understanding of the kindness of sentient beings when they were our mother on the basis of our mother of this life. So, many of us are fortunate in the sense that we had mothers who were very kind, who showed us a lot of affection throughout our lives. But sometimes, like a class I was teaching recently, one lady, she's had a very difficult relationship with her mother, very difficult. She really struggled with that step of even just thinking about the kindness of her mother in this life. So if that is difficult, at the start, obviously we want to come back to thinking about that person who was our mother in this life. But at the start, you can think of somebody else who was particularly kind to you in this life, because what we want to do is really try and engender that sense of affection that comes up in our mind when we're thinking about the kindness of this person, and use that as a basis for then spreading it out towards all sentient beings who have been our mothers. So once we have that understanding of the kindness that we've been shown by sentient beings when they are our mothers, or kind to us in a similar way to a mother, then we naturally develop that wish to repay the kindness. This is like just a normal step in life, isn't it? Day-to-day life. If someone shows you kindness, then your natural response is to want to show kindness in return, isn't it? That's it's almost like an automatic, polite thing to do in society. Yeah. So the point of these 3 steps, recognizing sentient beings have been our mothers, recollecting their kindness, and wishing to repay their kindness. In this context, the point of these 3 is so that we start to find sentient beings, regardless of our relationship with them in this life. We find all sentient beings without exception to be like old friends. So I mentioned this last week, if you remember, like if you were standing in the supermarket in a queue and you're in a rush and you want to get through, if you have that tight-minded attitude of self-cherishing that thinks me getting through, buying my stuff is the most important, then anybody who creates an obstacle for you achieving that goal will be somebody that you'll get annoyed with. Chances are high, right? You won't like those people, you probably say something nasty to them if if it comes to that. You might push in front of them. So you might get out of the queue a little faster, maybe not, but definitely your mind will have taken a hit, right? The only one who did that to you is you. Nobody else did it. None of the people even that were like, maybe creating obstacles for you getting out quickly, none of those people actually created that torment in your own mind. You made it yourself through self-cherishing. It's really fascinating. We like to blame others for our suffering, but in actual fact, we create most of our suffering ourselves. Yeah. So that's one way to go about it. The other way to go about it, for instance, if we were able to develop these states of mind, like recognizing sentient beings have been our mothers, recollecting the kindness that they showed us when they were our mothers, wishing to repay their kindness, to a point where anybody we came across was like an old friend, then you'd still be standing in line. You still need to get out, but you'd be standing there with all these people that you felt a sense of affection towards. You maybe even would get to the point where you're like, no, you go ahead of me. Yes, I need to go out, but that's fine. No, I can see you're in a bigger rush than I am. And your mind would actually be quite happy. So there's quite a difference in the attitude. The person who created that happiness in your mind at that time is you. Nobody else did it for you. You did it yourself. So this is the kind of attitude we're trying to develop through these 3 steps of recognizing mothers, recollecting their kindness and wishing to repay their kindness, developing that sense of affection towards all sentient beings, whoever they are, regardless of whether they're currently helping or harming you. And then there is the benefit that your mind will always be happy in whatever company you keep. So that's the point of these 3 steps. What that naturally leads to is the next 2 steps of affectionate loving kindness, which is a wish for beings to have happiness, and then great compassion wishes them to be free from suffering. So in all these steps that we've been talking about so far, what we're actually thinking about are sentient beings, aren't we? We're not at this point thinking about attaining enlightenment. We're thinking about sentient beings. We're developing affection towards sentient beings. We're developing that loving kindness towards sentient beings. We're developing great compassion towards sentient beings. And that great compassion, what it does is it becomes so powerful that we feel, given what we've just talked about, all those steps that have come before it, is that it is actually my responsibility to bring about happiness for sentient beings. It's my responsibility to relieve the suffering of sentient beings. So that's what we call the highest intention, where you're actually taking on that responsibility. I will do that. So still, we're talking about sentient beings, aren't we? It's like, I'm going to do that for the sake of, I have to alleviate that suffering of sentient beings. It's my responsibility to do this for sentient beings. It's still all about sentient beings. What that motivates you to do is it motivates you to turn your mind to a state where you can actually accomplish these things that you're setting out to do. We can currently, in our current state, we can help sentient beings a little bit. We can make some donations to charities. We can maybe, volunteer our time, these kinds of things, but they're very, very limited. So these are good things to do. I'm not saying don't do those things. Definitely still do those things. But the main thing that we need to do is eliminate all the obstacles within our own continuum that prevent us from working effortlessly and spontaneously for any sentient being, wherever they may be. That's only found in enlightenment. So having taken on that responsibility, it makes us turn our minds towards attaining enlightenment so we can actually accomplish that. So I have a bit of an analogy which I used in one of my other classes, so maybe it will work here as well, to give you a sense of how reflecting on a particular thing turns your mind towards another thing. So a couple of years ago, I was, I'm actually at my mum's at the moment. So my mum's elderly, and a couple of years ago when I was down here, and she was quite struggling over summer she's got quite a big garden, and she's having to stand outside, water the garden, and gets pretty hot where she lives. So the other day we had like 43 degrees Celsius, which I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but it is extremely hot, right? So I was thinking, I could see really that she was really struggling with having to look after the garden with all the watering, standing out there. She's got some physical problems, and I thought, okay, I can see that suffering is there. You know, I would like to do something about that suffering. I'd like to make it easier for her. You know, I'd like to make it so that she doesn't have to stand outside. She doesn't have to stand with, you know, pain here and pain there, and so that her life is easier, so that she has more happiness. So thinking about all of that, obviously I have a good relationship with my mother. You know, I thought she's been very kind to me throughout my entire life. She still supports me now. So I have that natural sense of wanting to do something for her because she has done so much for me. So it got to the point where I was thinking, okay, well, what can I do? I mean, you know, there's nobody around who can just stand and water the garden for her. If I water it for her when I'm here, that only really accomplishes it for a short period of time when I'm actually here. All the times I'm not here, then she still has to do it. And so I thought, well, it's really up to me to do something about this. So then I investigated, you know, I thought, well, what would be the best thing to do that would accomplish the goal of her having less suffering? I was like, okay, I've got to install a watering system, an irrigation system for her garden. So all of that thinking about my mum's situation, what it did was it made me turn my mind to how can I fix this problem in a, you know, in a long-term sense, not just in a temporary sense, but in a long-term sense. So once I worked out the thing I needed to do was install an irrigation system, that became my goal. So this is kind of like, you know, when you're developing the causal aspiration of recollecting the kindness sentient beings have shown to you, wishing to repay that kindness, wanting to alleviate their suffering, wanting to have happiness, taking on that responsibility to do it yourself, it makes you turn your mind to where can I actually accomplish this? I can accomplish it in enlightenment. So for me, with the watering system, it's a small analogy, right? It's a small example. Having thought about my mum's situation, my mum's difficulties, wanting to alleviate those difficulties, I turned my mind to installing the irrigation system. I don't know anything about irrigation systems. Well, I didn't. Now I do. So what I had to do is I had to research. Is it possible? First off, I checked, is it possible for me to actually install an irrigation system? You know, is that something I can do? Because I thought maybe I can't. I don't feel like I'm very sort of, I'm not a very sort of technically minded person. I don't really consider myself a gardener by any stretch of the imagination. Got no idea what's the best thing to put in or anything. So then I had to do a lot of analysis, a lot of research. I went to the local trade store here. Those of you who know Australia will know about Bunnings, which is like, you know, ubiquitous across Australia. It's the big trade store. Went and talked to lots of the people helping there about what's the best irrigation sprayers. I actually bought a few different ones, tested them out to see which would work best. And then I figured it out, and then I just went and did the whole thing, right? And it's like I did most of it during the summer, but then I had to come back freezing cold winter and install the second part of it. And I've got to say, there was a fair bit of suffering involved, but I kept doing it because I was so strongly motivated to help my mum. So that strong motivation to help my mum was what helped me to overcome all the obstacles that I faced in, you know, attaining my goal of installing the irrigation system. So even though my fingers were going numb in the winter, I was still out there. My mum's like, just come in. I was like, no, I've got to get it finished before I leave, you know, putting the different bits in the pipe and all of this. So in the end, I managed to install it and it works and it helps her. So I think it's quite a nice analogy for how this whole process of, you know, the sevenfold cause and effect instruction works for developing the mind of enlightenment. The strength of your understanding and your recollection of how kind sentient beings have been to you and developing that really strong sense of affection that motivates you to want to do something to help them, and that directs you to attaining enlightenment. Yeah. So this is the process. Do you have any questions? How do you feel about it in terms of, is it something that you feel like these are steps? We will go into the steps in more detail, but do you feel like these are steps that resonate with your mind? Can you see the logic behind it?
You're unmuted.
Yeah.
Yes.
The way you just presented it is very clear that the steps make a lot of sense, and whether I'll remember all of them, that's why I've written them down. But yeah, it absolutely makes sense. So thank you.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. Do you feel, Barbara, yeah?
Pardon?
These steps
Oh,
definitely make sense to me. And then in reality, I am just really stuck with the recent happenings in our country. And there's one person in particular, and I am trying to separate behaviors from the being. And even I am just really having a difficult time with that person that shot Renee Good. I just am.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to get unstuck.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there is no excuse for the behavior. There is no way you can rationalize that behavior in the sense of saying there's some way in which we can say that it is okay. Therefore, I can feel some sense of, I can allow my mind to feel some love towards that person, right? So it is very difficult. It is difficult. And it requires us to train our mind for us to be able to think about it in a different type of way, right? So it's not something that's going to automatically occur to us just by thinking of the situation that happened and be able to just all of a sudden go, oh yes, no, I can separate the person from the action and still have compassion for the person, but 100% say, no, that action is a wrong action. It's very difficult to do without training. So we have to work at it slowly, So, I mean, the only way to really view situations like that, and there are some in which there are, even greater acts of violence, perpetrated against many, many people by just one or two individuals as well. So it all comes back in the end, all of these acts of violence always come back to self-cherishing, the same self-cherishing that we have in our minds, they have in their minds. It is not as though the self-cherishing that is in our minds is okay, and the self-cherishing that they have in their minds is not okay. In both cases, it can lead to these kinds of acts of violence. There are certain conditions that person who has, when they kill another person, certain conditions that they have come across in their life that has allowed that self-cherishing to get to the point where it will think, it's like it allows the person to think that this is an okay path of action to follow. But actually, in our own minds, that self-cherishing that we ourselves have, if it meant the right conditions for it to happen, I think no question it could lead us down the same path. There's no question in my mind. We think, oh no, that wouldn't happen to me. But that's because we've met certain conditions that have made it so that we suppress the sort of more excessive actions of our self-cherishing. But what say you grew up in a different family, in a different cultural community, in a different, part of society that thought a different way. So you have different ideas that are coming in and meeting up with that self-cherishing that you have. You're probably going to end up going down that pathway, right? So I think it's not as though we can separate ourselves out from this other person who we see as committed this like really major act of violence and suffering on another person. Basically, the root is the same problem that we have in our own minds. But we have been fortunate to date, hopefully, that, you know, it hasn't gotten to the point for us where we have thought this is a right course of action. To think of another human being as like being not worth life hasn't happened for us, hopefully, you know. Or if it has happened for us in the past, that we've gotten to the point where we've recognized that that was a wrong way of thinking and we've changed the way that we think now. But for this person who shot Renee Good, right, they haven't gotten to that point. They haven't met those conditions. Other conditions have come together with their self-cherishing, that has then propelled them down this path towards violence. And the only result of that will be suffering. Suffering for the, you know, for the person that he shot, suffering for him in that immediate sense, for sure, and then suffering definitely for him in the future, because he's, you know, committed an act of killing. Not just killing, but killing a human, which is like a major non-virtue. So that necessarily, if we think about it in terms of karmic cause and result, necessarily will lead to a result of suffering in the future. Unless that person is able to purify that negativity. And there is always hope that that can happen, you know. So that's really really the only way to think about this situation, is that it's through causes and conditions that this person has gotten to the point where they have committed like quite a big act of violence. But also it's due to the fact that, you know, causes and conditions can produce various results, that if that person meets with positive causes and conditions in the future, whether it's this life or future lives, that they have the possibility for their minds to become positive, for them to purify that negativity, for them to actually become a person who's somebody we would look up to. This person has the potential to become a bodhisattva. This person has the potential to become a Buddha, because there is no negativity that cannot be purified. There is no affliction that cannot be removed from the mind. You know, think of the story of like, was it in the time of the Buddha, of Angulimala, who met a particular teacher, not a Buddhist teacher, who said, you know, in order to attain liberation, you have to kill 1,000 people. And so he went out and killed like 999, I think it was. And he, you know, he's almost the 1,000th. And the Buddha knew this, and he was like, oh, okay, well, I've got to do something about this. So he didn't want Angulimala to, you know, completely fulfill his intention of killing 1,000 people. And so he, you know, went to where Angulimala is, and Angulimala saw him and was like, oh, there's my 1,000th person. So he set off with the intention to kill the Buddha. But the Buddha, because he had these, you know, powers, he was able to just always be able to outrun Angulimala. You know, even if he's just walking slowly, he was able to always be ahead of Angulimala. So Angulimala was never able to catch up with him and kill him. And it was through actually that behavior of the Buddha that Angulimala was like, hang on, what's going on here? Started to have some doubt in his mind. And that doubt itself was able to create enough of space in his mind that he was able to transform his mind, and ended up becoming, you know, a disciple of the Buddha. So there are these stories from the past, which they're useful stories in the sense that it gives us a way to think about these kind of violent situations that we come across now as well. But I think it's really useful to try not to separate ourselves from people who commit these negative acts, in the sense of understanding that the root cause for them committing that negative action is in my mind too. It's really due to causes and conditions that certain people end up in certain situations. And that could happen for me too, if I'm unlucky enough to encounter the conditions that lead me down that path. Which is why I need to eliminate the self-cherishing from my own mind. Can't afford to leave any of it behind. Yeah. So does that give you something to work with?
It absolutely gives me a lot to work with. And
Mm.
I was raised Catholic, and there was a saying that really did resonate with me there, but for the grace of God go I. And that's what you're saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome. Karen?
I just wanted to let her know. I don't know if this is going to help or not, but a couple years ago when, we had an interesting administration in the White House, and I was really upset. And it was just, I was ruminating. And that's where I can see that Buddhist practice makes a huge difference. This does not mean that when the stuff that went down in Minnesota didn't make me upset. But what I'll tell you is instead of being like spinning and really, really nuts for a week or two, or just, and being, like, I was finding I'd go to a doctor's office, and if the nurse asked me something political, by the time I sat down and had the blood pressure cuff, it was looking like I was about to have a stroke. But what I'll tell you is with the practice, yes, I was still very upset. It was different. The emotions that came up were just deep, deep sadness. There was anger. I'm working on it, but I was spinning only for a much shorter period of time. It was like a couple hours, like as people were sending me videos and stuff. And then I I stepped away from the news, which I'm not recommending to you. I'm just saying I stepped away. And so it's like a day of, and then I'm back, which is better than weeks or months or 4 flipping years. So I don't know if that helps you or not, but it does work. And I would do the 4 immeasurables, and Trump would pop up, and I'd be like, and I'd just sort of say, I was trying to say, okay, well, somebody loves him, his mother loves him. There's people on death row that have mommies that think they're wonderful and love them. And I would just send him, love and compassion. And I wouldn't do it if there was a string about him, wanting to be happy and not have the causes of suffering. But it would be really nice if you didn't run this next election, because if there was any kind of I couldn't do it just complete from the heart, I just stopped. And I did that for a solid year of just, and I'm still not, to be honest, I'm not there. I am not. I still get angry, but I know that it's better. So I don't know if that's good, or it's, you want to send an ICE agent to my home. But and I was able to think, wow, that ICE, agent's going to hit with a lot of stuff. But then you watch the movie and your head explodes, right? So I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't know if that helps or it doesn't help, but I would have thought there's no way I could have. And I've just made a couple of like inches of change, but I have seen change. So I don't know if that helps.
It's a good
Apologies.
thing. That's what we want to see, is we want to see, a change gradually over time. We can't expect to have like massive change all of a sudden. Like that's, it's just not how mind training works. Mind training works by, we're basically working to rehabituate, refamiliarize with a better way of thinking, a more beneficial way of thinking. That's what we're trying to do. So we acknowledge and recognize the negative ways of thinking in our mind, and we see how they're incorrect, and we work towards correct and positive ways of thinking. Yeah. So that's basically how it works. Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
just a quick follow-up, because I hear this a lot from teachers over the years, and I wonder, is sort of, if we were to dumb it down to the gold about, are we supposed to be like either happy or neutral and not into the anger stuff? Is the goal kind of not to be flat, because His Holiness laughs a lot and seems to have this love, but and he has said, now whether I believe him or not, I don't know, because he said, you know, I get really angry and I blow. And he said, and then it's like, it's over. And so I wonder whether he also says, gee, I aspire to be a bodhisattva. And I think, babe, if you're not a bodhisattva, we're all screwed. So I don't know if he's trying to make us feel better or not. But that's what I wonder, is if I'm just supposed to be happy all the time and nothing else affects me. Is that ultimately the goal? That we're never pissed, even for short periods of time. And that's okay. I just kind of need someone to tell me, where am I headed?
Well, first of all, we'd have to say, hang on, I'm just going to go back just for 1 minute to your previous statement. Is like sometimes switching off, sometimes walking away is the way that you have to deal with something. If if you're unable to really bring that positive attitude you've been training in to the moment, sometimes it's the time to sort of walk away, think about something else, give yourself a moment to reset, and then come back to it gradually, right? So that is definitely a technique to use. In terms of the goal of what we're aiming for, we have to ask, well, what is happiness in actual fact? We're not aiming for this like excited, yeah, I'm so happy, everything's going amazing, my life's so good, right? Like that kind of excited happiness is not what we're aiming for. That sort of is something that is unstable, I'd say. The excitement of like getting to go on that holiday that you've been just waiting for, and it's like, oh, amazing. Like what we're aiming for is a mind that's calm, not a mind that's neutral per se, that doesn't care. That's not what we're talking about. But a mind that is peaceful, a mind that is calm, a mind that's not buffeted, by these highs and lows, like great excitement, great anger, right? We want to try and reduce all of that so that our mind becomes calm and peaceful. And that is really what proper happiness is. If we're able to get to a point where we have that stably, that's really proper happiness. I don't mean like boredom, not like that, but a calm, peaceful mind. Over time with the training, then it will become the fact that you just won't get angry, you won't get irritable, When His Holiness says that, I mean, you have to look at it in a particular way. We'd probably say that he's showing that aspect of being like an ordinary being because he needs to show us something that we can relate to, right? If he was showing an aspect of like being this person that we just like, well, I can't aspire to be like that because I can't see how it's possible, then probably would not be as helpful to us as when he shows like these ordinary aspects. But actually, if we're thinking about it from a Buddhist perspective, we would say that in actual fact, in his own mind, regardless of what happens with his speech or with his, physical expression, which might on occasion be wrathful if it needs to be wrathful, if it's a particular purpose in that case. But in terms of his mind, I mean, it's hard to imagine that it would not be calm and peaceful and loving all of the time. Yeah. So that's really what we're aiming for, is that calm, loving, kind, peaceful, compassionate mind. With compassion, of course, there can be times where there's, in looking at the suffering of sentient beings, and I don't just mean the manifest suffering, of body and mind, but this suffering really of lacking control over our experiences, lacking control over, like going back to your point, Barbara, of what causes and conditions we come across in life. So there's people who really have, from the very time that they were born, have lacked control over who looks after them, what kind of views that they come across. In fact, we ourselves didn't have control over that process, right? There's our karma that dictated to whom we were reborn and what happened to us as we got older, who looked after us, what kind of views we encountered. So there are people who, we can say that we all don't have control over those causes and conditions. So thinking about how that lack of control over causes and conditions in our life can lead to all sorts of outcomes. Outcomes where people have, a predilection for violence. Outcomes where people have sort of like a natural, therefore, tendency towards loving kindness, all based on these causes and conditions that we don't have control over. So really thinking about that at times can make it so that we are, through thinking that, developing that compassion in our mind, actually you can develop this sense of sadness and thinking about it. They talk about there's one bodhisattva who was always crying because he was thinking about all these different sufferings of sentient beings, not just the sufferings of body and mind, but all these different sufferings. So compassion itself may lead to the mind being, a little bit sad at times as well. But loving kindness can lead to great joy in the mind because you're thinking of that wish for other sentient beings to have happiness. And when they attain happiness, especially not just temporary happiness, but proper happiness, where they've eliminated afflictions, where they've eliminated ignorance, they've eliminated all the causes that might lead them to behave in these negative ways, then you yourself are happy because they've accomplished what you've wished for them. So there's also great joy in the mind as well. So what we're aiming for is that state where we have a loving, kind, compassionate, peaceful mind that is not going to be swayed by our attachment or our aversion. That's what we're aiming for. So it's not just like a boring neutrality, not at all. Yeah. Okay, so I realized time's up. I was going to do a meditation, but we've run out of time. That's okay. All right, so today we've just basically done an introduction of this sevenfold cause and effect instruction. So try to remember as much as you can about that entity of the mind of enlightenment, how it's striving for enlightenment, and it has that causal motivating factor, which is wanting to accomplish the welfare of sentient beings. So these are the two aspirations that accompany the mind of enlightenment. The one that strives for enlightenment, the one that strives for the welfare of others. So therefore we have this aspiration, may I attain enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. So through this sevenfold cause and effect instruction, we're working to develop those two aspirations, thinking really fully about our relationship to other sentient beings in terms of how they've been our mother. We'll talk about past and future lives. And then on that basis, really having that affection towards them, wishing them to have proper unchanging happiness that's free of afflictions, wanting them to be completely free of suffering and taking on that responsibility to achieve that ourselves. So that we end up with this mind that is naturally positive towards all sentient beings. And also as a byproduct, we achieve our own welfare, the removal of our own suffering and the causes for our own suffering as a byproduct. So that's what we've kind of briefly talked about today, and we'll talk about it a bit more next week. Okay, so we'll just finish off with dedicating all the merits. There's great questions that you asked, and if you have any more that you haven't asked this week, feel free to ask them next week. But thinking about all of these merits that we've accumulated through our class today, may they all go towards us attaining this state of enlightenment so that we can accomplish the welfare of others in a perfect way. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, everybody. And I look forward to seeing you again next week.
Thank you so much.